Welcome back, Podcasting on a Plane. And by now, you've probably heard some of the episodes I recorded with Max Trescott over the last few weeks, whether it was on his show where we picked apart a few rather well-known Cirrus accidents, or maybe on his show, Aviation News Talk, where I came on to talk about the 10 things that pilots do that bug air traffic controllers. But either way, my hope is that you've now gained some insight into how the system works on a daily basis and how you kind of fit into the bigger game. Now, let me tell you first what fun it was to record those with Max. I mean, to sit there with him and have a discussion like that, it was amazing. I mean, I don't know what else to call it, really. And when I made those episodes with him, my goal, as always, was to present the view from both sides. And that was his goal, too. And to take my ATC experience and my flying experience and merge that with Max's flying experience and his one-of-a-kind aviation insight and make some stuff for you guys that was more than just entertaining, but insightful, and to give you new tools to take with you as you go through your aviation experience. I hope that was your experience with those shows, but I'm going to level with you. There was a little something nagging at me as we recorded both times. And I've said it before, actually on those shows, and I'll say it again. I don't like to armchair quarterback. I mean, not publicly at least, but it's hard for me to get the right mixture of picking apart an incident, but yet still keeping a level head about what a fellow pilot or fellow controller did. On the topic of stuff that bugs ATC, I mean, all controllers walk around with their own personal set of pet peeves, right? Pilots do too. But I never want to complain. Like, I don't want to get in front of this microphone here or go on somebody else's show and just, let loose everything that bugs me. That's not cool. But what I want to do is give insight and let pilots see how we think of things on our side so that they can do better, right? And after we're done, I felt really good about it. I really did. Usually I have some cognitive dissonance, but no, I felt good. Until I got this email from Rob Mark. You know Rob, the senior editor of Flying Magazine. Here it goes. It says, "Hey Brandon, I enjoyed your tips on Max's show, but I have a comment on them we should chat about, I think." Oh man. Chat. When my mom said chat and I was a kid, I didn't want to chat about whatever it was. It was bad. Anyway, I'm Brandon Gonzalez. This is Podcasting on a Plane. Thanks for joining in. This is an aviation podcast. It's where I take my 25-year background in aviation as a pilot, as a flight instructor, an air traffic controller, an aircraft salesman, a line serviceman, and a plane crash survivor. And I combine that with some good old-fashioned audio engineering and an industry expert or two and give you something that'll hopefully help you in your aviation endeavors, whatever they might be. Today on the show, what happens when a couple of guys with a double-sided long view get together and start talking shop about something important to them. Don't go away. So first, a little bit about Rob. As if you didn't already know, he's a senior editor of Flying Magazine, and you've all heard him for years on Airplane Geeks and his own JetWhine production at JetWhine.com. He's also a journalism alum at Northwestern University, and this is actually where our story kind of takes a fun turn. I don't think either one of us knew how much we had in common. So my wife actually went to Northwestern, and I went to Purdue, so I flew up there all the time to visit. And I always flew into Powauke, or Chicago Executive, whatever it's called now. A lot of people don't know this, but Rob, he used to be a tower controller too. Guess where? That's right, Powauke. And his office, right down the street, is probably something I've driven past 100 times in Evanston. And so far, it looks like our careers are following a strikingly similar path. Now, him and I, we've gone back and forth before. You might remember he's even recorded a piece for this show. It's called The Scariest Takeoff I Ever Made. Go back and check it out. It's the title of episode number 23. Cool. But there's still the whole matter of this chat thing. It's probably time we get that sorted out, huh? All right, here goes nothing. All right, Rob. Well, I'm a little bit nervous because you heard my interview with Max Trescott on Aviation News Talk the other day, and then you sent me a little email and you said there was a couple things that you wanted to chat about. So, you're now on the show. What would you like to say?
Well, I'm impressed that I made you nervous. I don't think I've ever had that problem before, but it was a great version of what pilots should know that they do that make controllers crazy. And I was listening to it in the car, and each item that you mentioned, I went, oh yeah, I would have mentioned that one. Oh, yep, that was a good one. Oh yeah, he's got that one right. But having just had a conversation with one of the supervisors at our tower out here in Chicago I fly from Chicago Executive Airport, which is the old Palwaukee Airport for really old people. But you know what I bothers me the most is that I worked there as my first controller station as a ATC controller back in the 70s. And back then, we ran 220,000 operations, and we did it with some parallel runways. And it was an insane asylum. And we had a lot of people that didn't make it through the training program. I was lucky enough or good enough to do it. But now our airport runs about 79,000 operations, and they are often just overwhelmed by the situation, the traffic situations in the area. And for the life of me, I cannot understand that. And I called and had a chat with one of the soups in the tower. And I said, maybe, and I guess I should let people know we have a couple of runways. We have a runway 16, which is a 5,000-foot runway that has an ILS approach, and runway 12 that is about 4,500 feet, and they intersect about midfield. But all our controllers want to do is run everybody straight into 16, because most of our traffic comes from the north, because good old O'Hare is just down to the south. And that makes some kind of sense, but when you mix what you do at your airport, jets and Cubs and Cessna 150s and all that, it doesn't work smoothly unless you, as the controller, can be kind of flexible. And that's probably the thing that I think drives me the craziest. My pet peeve at our local tower is that they don't demand a whole lot out of their controllers. They say, look, everybody's got to go straight into 16 because it's too, we don't want to overwhelm the trainee controllers. And again, the other day I was out 4 miles north of the airport coming straight into 16 and a 172. And they suddenly decided I was going to be number 2 or 3 behind a Hawker that was on a 13-mile final for the same runway. And I tried my best not to say anything, but I do think I keyed the mic and said, okay, how's that going to work? Because I couldn't figure out how I was going to get behind a guy that was on a 13-mile final when I was only 4 miles out from the runway. And it's that situation that we've seen where you drive everybody to one runway, get them close, and then say, oh gosh, this isn't going to work. And everybody that's in a propeller airplane's out there doing 360s, and it's just insane. And so we were trying to have this conversation about, why don't you bring some folks in from either to the west of the localizer or the east, bring them up close to the airport, give them a downwind to the runway 12 runway. We'd be above the traffic landing on 16, and then just bring us into the loop. Say, hey, Cessna 838, plan your base accordingly, but the Hawker on a 2-mile final for 16 has got to land and get through your intersection before you can land. And I go, okay, I got that. I can plan that. But it's the fact that they don't even think of that. And I don't think they trust the pilots enough to even give them the option to do that. And so again, with traffic, probably 30% of what we had years ago. And Brandon, you'll notice I didn't say anything like, back in my day when I was learning, I didn't want to say that because I thought that was kind of stupid. But I don't think controllers in our place are being very flexible. And it's a shame because the traffic pattern just goes insane. We've got, as I said earlier, we've got people, doing 360s and 270s and flying 6-mile base legs. It's just nuts. And again, when the soup told me that they didn't want to overwhelm the controllers, I said this on the phone, might you, not on the radio, but I said, come on, guys, Jiminy Christmas. We handled 3 times as much traffic for a whole heck of a lot less money. I'm sorry, I think that's your job. You've got to let people go as controller trainees and let them work it out, or give them a little guidance about using another runway, and let them work it out. Let them figure out how to bring the instructors into the loop that are in the traffic pattern with students, and say, guys, I really, in some way, guys, I really need your help because we've got a lot of jets coming in on 16, and we got to try and keep the training traffic on 12, but something like that. And I can't believe that nobody wants to do that. And I've seen it at other airports as well, where maybe I'm number one for takeoff, and they'll say, hold short landing traffic. And I look out there, and I can't even see the landing traffic. It's so far away. And I just think that's crazy. And again, I just think it's because somehow over the last 30 years, we have gotten to a point where we accept minimum standards, minimum performance out of some controllers. And I don't mean all of them by any stretch of the imagination, but some places I've visited, it just boggles my mind.
Now, that's interesting because you are uniquely qualified to actually make that phone call to your tower as somebody who has been certified once upon a time there and worked significantly higher traffic. So that's actually kind of interesting. And I wonder what the guy on the other end of the phone thought as he kind of heard that discussion, because often, we don't get a lot of complaints or anything, but sometimes, a pilot will call and they'll be curious about why something was handled a certain way. And usually we explain it pretty easily, and then the guy understands because there's a ton of background stuff, but usually that person is not somebody who is certified for X many years at that particular facility working 5 times the traffic, huh?
Well, and I think it's a very good point. I mean, the soup knew me. In fact, just probably a month earlier, we'd had a pilot controller forum at the airport, and I'll bet we must have had 60 people there. And I moderated it and tried to, let them speak. But then when we got to okay, so tell me, why do you guys do this? There are always those questions. Or, 3 weeks ago on a Sunday afternoon about 4:00, I was out there coming in from the west, and you made me circle for, what? And of course, the controller, we probably don't even have the right person. And they go, why did that happen? And of course, those kinds of questions are impossible for anybody to answer. But on an overall operational strategy, we always came from the north. And for people that may be wondering, if you pull up a chart or online somewhere, you can see that Chicago Executive is kind of sandwiched in the class, beneath the Class B and in our own Class C. Class D, north of O'Hare. So we have limited options. But we had, back in the old days, what we called a TCA, which was the predecessor to the class airspace issues. But it gave us the same problem. We couldn't go south. We were limited going west and east, but we made it work. Now, did we do anything dangerous? I don't think so. Not that we were ever told. And again, we were running 220-some thousand operations. So to me, when I'm flying a jet in there, of course I want the long runway. I don't mind that. But I would also be used to somebody telling me, before or when we hit the marker, which is about 6 miles, maybe 7 miles from the end of the runway. Hey, best approach speed, or I think they used to use something like compatible approach speed, because you got a guy in a Cherokee that's on a Cherokee. There you go. Boy, am I dating myself. Nobody even knows what that is anymore. But I meant an archer or a warrior. 2 mile final. I'd go, okay, we'll just, we'll go to final flap setting and pull the power back a little bit and fly at ref, and we made it work. And 20 knots slower gives the controller and the pilot enough time to get that guy down and get him off the runway. But I almost never, at our airport at least, hear the controllers try to get the pilots to help them. They seem like, again, and for all the controllers that are listening, I'm sorry, I'll give you my email address. Don't yell at Brandon, because he's the one that invited me on. You can come and yell at me. But again, it seems like they want to do this all themselves, and that if they can't make it work inside their own head, then there's really not many options. And I just think that that's silly.
Yeah, when I work or train other controllers, I always, and actually even when I talk to pilot groups, this is one of my favorite things to say is, this is my Tom Cruise statement, is I just picture him standing there saying, help me help you. Help me help you. And that's one of those things where, this is a two-way street. And I know I keep banging that drum on this podcast just over and over, but air traffic really, in fact, is a two-way street. And a lot of perhaps maybe newer controllers that have not spent a lot of time in aviation before maybe don't understand that pilots are actually quite capable of doing a lot of things to help you. And if you can get two airplanes to see each other, that's the key to everything. Now, as controllers, a lot of times, I'm sure the rule book is a lot different now and a bit more restrictive. Matter of fact, I know it is. And there are a couple things that have gone away that I think you guys were probably allowed to use back then that probably helped. And the first one would be line up and wait. And the procedures for that have changed greatly. A lot of airports don't even have it. Matter of fact, a lot of pilots don't understand that mainly it actually got taken away from everybody. And then you had to sort of petition to get it back, was more or less how that process worked. And you had to have a reason and a justification and all that. And it wasn't too hard to get it back, but a lot of airports really didn't have the justification for it. And I'm not sure, do you know if Palwaukee or Executive has line up and wait?
They do. And well, let's see, we get line up and wait all the time, but I still believe you cannot clear somebody to land if they have somebody in position until that person starts to roll. And that, you're right, we used to be able to we could clear a guy to land from 25 miles out if we, again, the rule that we worked with is that if you believe there will be adequate separation at the time that the aircraft crosses the runway threshold, you can clear them to land. And that was the only restriction we had. And honestly, I doubt we could have worked 220-some thousand operations if we didn't have the position and hold. You'd put a jet in position and hold on runway 34, and you'd have somebody working on a short final for a touch and go on runway 30. And as soon as the 150 would go through the intersection, was cleared for takeoff, runway 34, turn right, heading 050, whatever it was. And that would have never worked if we couldn't do that. And you might have another jet west of the airport on downwind for runway 34 and 2 or 3 in the pattern for 30. And we again, as I said earlier, we would tell the pilots, look, here's how it's got to work, because it's a lot easier for you to maneuver than it is for the jet to maneuver. They go, sure, okay, we got that. And it didn't work all the time. And we would always tell everybody, look, there's always, we would visit the flight schools, say, look, guys, this is what we're trying to do. You could really help us. I can't guarantee it's always going to work. And if it doesn't, trust me, you're going to go around before I send the jet around, because it's a lot easier for us. And it may be inefficient for you, but it's kind of the rules of the game we came up with. But nobody does that at our airport. They don't even want to touch crossing runways. I mean, they just don't even want to do it.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to intersecting runways, there are a few more rules, I'm sure, about that now as well. Luckily at my airport, we don't have any intersections. But on the line up and wait thing too, another thing that makes that interesting and a huge restriction, and you're absolutely correct about the not being able to clear somebody to land until that aircraft starts their takeoff roll. But also, there has to be certain staffing in the tower cab to do it that way. And there needs to be, there's different rules for it, but there needs to be either the controller in charge needs to be separate by themselves, or a local assist that's not combined with anything else. And so that way, the idea is that there are a certain amount of people, at least 3, that are looking and watching, and somebody whose eyes are completely not distracted, so that they can watch to make sure you don't more or less land somebody on top of somebody else in position that you perhaps forgot about. But yeah, when it comes to the other thing you were talking about, that's called anticipated separation now. And it is the same. I mean, I can still clear somebody if there's no reason to withhold the clearance, and I'm not going to line someone up in front of them. I can still clear somebody 20 miles out. I usually don't do it just because they usually, when they're on about a 5-mile final, they'll ask, wait, were we clear to land? But yeah, if I'm going to line somebody up, then we have to tell them to continue traffic. We'll hold in position. And then you're correct. I can't issue the clearance till the departing aircraft starts the roll. But additionally, I like what you said there, and it kind of goes back to my Jerry Maguire point there, is you went to each of the flight schools individually and the operators and said, hey, look, here's the plan, here's the rules the FAA gives us, and here's what we're trying to do. And then I think that really sowed the seeds of, help me, help you. And so that way the pilot community could be engaged in a way that they knew what you were trying to do. They knew what you were trying to achieve. And then now that's like that magic ingredient to make it all work out, because, the tool bag, as you know, that we have sometimes, especially for speed control, that's sort of like my number one, oh man, if I could change anything, because, especially at the tower, you're usually dealing with people, say it's a jet on an ILS. Once they're inside that final approach fix, I mean, you don't have speed control over them technically. It's up to them. And then before that, the Tracon guy really only had a couple of speeds that they could issue, and it's based on their distance. Like they could slow them to 170 knots, or I think the other one's 220. And there's some other ones in the climb. I'm sure I'm going to get an email on that one correcting me, but there aren't that many speeds you can issue to a lot of airplanes. And then, of course, when you're dealing with smaller aircraft that can't even reach that speed in the first place, you really are just left with things like maintain maximum forward speed or maintain slowest practical speed. And that's sort of two ends of a spectrum. And I mean, you want to say slowest practical speed to a Cherokee? I mean, that could be very, very slow. And maybe you don't need them to go quite that slow. I just need you to not be going 110. Or maximum forward speed. Well, what is that? I mean, that could be a lot of numbers to a lot of different people, but maybe that's too fast. So it's hard for us to really fine tune it. Like I would love for this guy to go 85 knots right now. And unfortunately, there's nothing in the book that allows us to issue that speed. And I understand why. I mean, they don't want controllers issuing a speed that's too low for an aircraft that would be unsafe. And that's completely correct. I agree with that. But again, when it comes to your speed control, sometimes it's hard to just fine tune it. So then we come down to, well, let's try to do it visually. So I'll tell the guy, hey, you're number 3 following that Cirrus. That Cirrus is going 90 knots over the ground, runway, whatever, cleared for the option. And then that way they can sort of fine tune it themselves. But again, you had to give them the tools to help you. And sometimes it's hard to come up with a proper way to say that to make it all work out.
Well, I think you also mentioned a good point. You have a 711065, which is kind of the air traffic control Bible that decides how controllers are going to say things, when they're going to say them, and you live by that, and that's understandable. But then you get into the judgment calls, just like you have with pilots. And to my earlier point of sitting short of the runway, waiting for landing traffic when it turns out to be an Archer on a 3.5 mile final, and I'm in a Cirrus. I mean, I could have taken off, come around, and been following that guy in the traffic pattern and made it work by the time the guy gets down. And that's just a judgment call. But see, again, to me, that person, well, in fact, the person I have in mind is certified, newly certified, it means to me that people watched this person before they were certified and watched them do things like this and said, okay, better safe than sorry, I guess. And that's okay for the controller side, but you've got to realize that we have a dynamic world here, and that we're trying to accomplish something in the cockpit as well, and that having airplanes sit and be delayed unnecessarily is just, I'm sorry, it's poor technique. And what we have found at our local airport is that certain people in upper echelons of air traffic tend not to be very cooperative about feedback. And unfortunately for me, being the mouthy that I am, I just go, oh, give me a break. Come on. We're supposed to be working together, guys. Come on. So I don't have a lot of patience with that. I don't do that on the radio, I must say. But I think, too, it's important that controllers realize that we're trying to train pilots to operate at that airport, just like controllers are trying to be trained to operate at that airport. And we are trying to explain to students, okay, now they told you to do this because of that. Simply following orders in aviation doesn't work, because you don't build any decent judgment by simply following, well, this is the way you do it, so just do it this way. If the student doesn't know why, controller or pilot, how can they ever synthesize an answer for some unusual situation if they really never knew why anybody handled traffic the way that they did? And that's the part I think that, to me, I think is lacking in places. I know you guys talked about that Cirrus incident, the Cirrus accident at Houston, a couple of years ago. I mean, it's become famous for this poor lady in the Cirrus that they kept sending around and changing the runway. And I don't know. I mean, the first time that they put the woman in the pattern, I said never once in the entire recording did I hear the local controller who issues the landing clearances ever say, 737, 2.5 mile final, follow him to runway 4. Never once did I hear the word follow ever even come up. It was just like what we see. They're trying to give pilots, okay, fly this heading, climb to that altitude, proceed this far south or north or whatever, and then turn in. And, you don't need to fly the airplane for me. You really don't. Just keep me in the loop, show me the traffic, and I'll follow them. But what I would also have done in that poor Houston situation is that I'd have punched the button to the approach controller and said, look, I've got a bunch of little guys in the pattern. Give me a little space on the next airliner. And an approach control would say, oh, sure, we could do that for you. We'll do the best we can. We probably need X number of knots to this particular place. But if we tell the pilot, they'll help you out. But they don't do that. They just insist on sort of trying to manipulate the airplane from the tower. And I just think it's crazy because we've got some examples of where it just does not work.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the term for that we use in air traffic is called over-controlling. And that's really exactly what it is, pretty plain and simple. It's hard to get that balance oftentimes of how much control you want to retain over everything, because, that's your job. That's your job title. You're an air traffic controller. You're not an air traffic, let's see how it shakes out. But at the same time, you can really go a little too far with it sometimes and go into over-controlling, in which case things like that start happening and you're trying to force situations that may not work. And then it's going to end up being your fault. And unfortunately, I think this goes to the original or your overall point here is when are we teaching the judgment? Where's the judgment coming from? Because that's really the buffer between over controlling and not controlling anything, is how much intervention needs to be made. How much control do you need to apply this situation? And you may not need to apply that much. Frankly, at a tower, your main goal is to just get everybody to see each other. Then you issue the sequence. That's what the book says. And then they kind of work it out themselves. And that's a technique that I know a very good CFI will teach the student as well, is how to space yourself appropriately with your interval when you're in the traffic pattern, how to space yourself behind a jet, how to space yourself behind whatever. And I really love it when pilots ask, hey, what's this guy in front of me doing if they missed it? Usually they listen, but if the guy in front of them is going to be a touch and go or a full stop or something like that, it really shows me that they're paying attention and they're really trying to do their best to space themselves out. And I'll often try to tell them as well, hey, the aircraft in front of you is a missed approach only. They're not going to land. So they know that, and they don't have to go put 2 miles in between them now. They're just going to tuck in right behind them. And then that way we can work a lot more traffic. But you apply the appropriate amount of control to the situation, whatever it warrants.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point as well. And actually, this is a lot of fun. I really haven't had a chance to talk about this kind of ATC technique with anybody, because everybody I know is a pilot and they're not a controller. So it is interesting, and but I think another issue that we face, and maybe other people that are listening might know the answer to this, but when you end up in a situation where the local management says, hey, look, you know what? We're the tower. We run the place. Just shut up and follow the orders. There's really no recourse for a pilot. I guess you could call the FSDO or something, but and short of trying to start a war between the controllers and the pilots, which nobody wants to do, there needs to be a balance somewhere where people can add input that people will actually listen to. And I think that happens in life. You don't need to agree with me, and that's okay. I don't need you to agree with me, but I would at least like you to listen to my perspective and say, okay, let me think about that. But that I just find that for some people, it in management, and it just doesn't ring that way. They still have this we're running the show kind of mentality, and it's pretty tough to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes in a bureaucracy, you're dealing with a lot of people have differing independent goals, right? So, I mean, the goal of the controller right there holding that, wearing the headset and holding the mic, they might be, I want to get everybody on the ground or everybody out as fast as possible. And that's fine. But then their manager or their immediate supervisor might be like, okay, that's great. And then you've got now a new level of conservative put in there. And then that person's boss is going to, now they have to answer to a higher up. So they're going to want to be even more conservative about how things are run. And you can kind of see the pattern developing here. And eventually you may get to the point where there's a person who doesn't want to be reached at all. And they're just going to say, hey, look, this is the rules, end of discussion. So how can we circumvent that process, or how can we sort of, I don't want to say beat the bureaucracy, but if you want to have your message received, what do you think are some ways that we can do that? I know we talked a little bit about pilot controller forums. Those are one of my personal favorites. I speak at those all the time. And one of the reasons I like that is because then people can put a face to a voice and they can really ask those questions. And yeah, I know there's a lot of those kind of there I was, what happened stories. And, I don't know, I wasn't there. But I feel like it's a time though where at least the message can get out there in sort of like a grassroots way. And then that way, at least the kind of front end employees, the controllers and immediate supervisors, and then the immediate stakeholders at the airport can kind of get together and have a talk about it. But what are some other ways you think we can kind of get the message across of like cooperation, and I don't just want to use words like teamwork, but that judgment of the help me help you stuff. Like, what do you think we could do?
Well, I can only tell you that I think one of the answers is something that I'm absolutely not doing these days, which is to visit the air traffic facility in question, whether it's your tower, our tower, or White Plains, whatever it is, and get to know the people a little bit and let them know you, so that they can come to trust you. Because I think once controllers and pilots trust each other, and they hear somebody, whether it's on the phone and usually this should be handled on the phone or, with a personal visit with one of those, hey, this happened out there a little while ago. I'm really confused. What was going on? Because I thought this was happening, and then someone can say, oh man, yeah, we were just buried. We were a person short, or, and I can listen to that. See, because I know none of us are perfect. I get that. The number of times that over the years I've had people tell me about things, and I'll go, oh, no, wait a minute. Can I come in and listen to the recording? And they go, yeah, sure. And I still get people that say, you want to listen to the recording? Because half the pilots on the airport may not even know that the radio chatter is even recorded. But I've always found people to be very good at that. And a couple of times I have heard myself say things that I didn't even know I said, acknowledging for something, because I went, yeah, okay, right, got it. And I was really busy watching a guy in an airplane do something because I thought he was getting a little scary. And then I got, yelled at for missing a turn or something on the ground. And I didn't hear that. Well, you acknowledged for it. No, I don't think I did. And you go back and listen to the recording and you hear it and you go, oh, sorry. I guess I did screw that up. And see, and I don't have a problem with that. And maybe that just comes with age, being able to say, you're right, I screwed up, my fault. I'll take the heat for that. And I don't think we have that kind of personality system, at least in our local tower. I don't think I've ever heard anybody certainly say that on frequency or in discussions with other pilots when they've been in the tower. Sometimes I get the impression some of the controllers think of us as the enemy, and I don't understand why that is. But I mean, it's important that everybody knows that we need you guys, but you guys need us. Because if the traffic count, as we were talking before the show started, when the traffic count descends below a particular point, the FAA tower is out of there. It is gone. And maybe it gets handed off to a contract facility, which, sometimes is questionable too. But, it doesn't go on forever that you can kind of ignore the user's needs or their conversations or whatever. So again, going back to your original question, I think I need to be up in the tower more myself, and I need to encourage other instructors to be up there more so that the controllers can get to figure out who we are and which ones are the good ones, which are the ones that they go, oh, here comes Frank. We better keep an eye out for him. And really, because we're all just people, and that's different from what it used to be when I was a controller 30 years ago. The pilots knew the controllers knew the pilots. They were always up in the tower saying, "Hey, you guys want some cookies? I got a bunch. We'll bring them up." "Oh yeah, come on up. We'll sit and shoot the breeze while we're not working traffic." And it was a very friendly relationship with a whole heck of a lot more traffic. But, we see that in a lot of businesses too, I think, where people say, look, my job is to sell you this thing or this service. I take your money. Okay, thanks, bye. If you even get a thanks anymore. I mean, and the way people interact with each other is just different. Maybe this is part of that process. I don't know. But I wish it could be better. And actually, having spoken to you here this last half hour, I think I just came up with a few ideas that I probably need to practice more of what I preach.
Sure. No, and that's just it, is here we are talking. I think that's the point right there. We just made it. We're talking about this. And maybe that's just all that needs to happen sometimes at places where maybe the relationship isn't as good as we just need to talk it out, And without sounding too corny, I mean, really, I think if we all can turn, the us and them into just us, like things would be a lot better. And, the unfortunate thing is, post 9/11 and so on, it's a lot harder to visit air traffic facilities than it used to be. But I do want to say here, because this is very important, is you still can visit air traffic facilities.
Absolutely.
And you still should visit air traffic facilities. And I think that would be the first thing to do to really, anywhere that you feel the relationship might be struggling or broken, is start that dialogue. Because I think a lot of times there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of outdated information. And, the pilot training community right now is thriving because there's a pilot shortage. And the controller training situation it's kind of on the decline now because, most people are certified or whatever. But what I mean by that is, about 6-8 years ago, it seemed like everybody was in training because after the huge hirings that started around 2007, 2008, well, people were getting in, there were classes going through Oklahoma City, people were getting to their facilities, everybody was training. So there was a lot of training on both sides. But then now that everything's kind of worked out, I think now is the time to really start that dialogue up again. And not only that, but if you want to go visit a tower, just make the call. They'll probably be able to set you up a time. It'll probably be during business hours, but it can happen. And then same thing for, TRACONs. I mean, those are usually harder to find where they even are, centers as well. But you can go there. Like you can actually visit these places. And I think that makes a huge amount of difference. But the one point I wanted to touch on that you made that was my absolute favorite is you said, bring cookies.
We're all suckers for food.
Yeah. No, I'll tell you what, if you show up at your local control tower with a couple of pizzas, I think we can get a dialogue going. I'm pretty sure we can.
Well, and I think that's it's a very needed effort, I think, because it can't just be about, tower's not very nice to us. Why do I care? Well, because it will never get better if somebody doesn't lift a finger. One of the airports I did some work with years ago down in the Dallas area has a restriction. It's a one runway airport, an FAA tower, but the airport has banned training traffic. No touch and goes, none of that stuff. And I said to the airport manager one day, well, Why do you do that? Well, because we don't want those little airplanes getting in the way of the jet traffic. And I said, you see the building over there, the tower? Let them work that out. Okay? You don't need to make that decision for the entire world. You really don't. And that's what they're there for. Let them do their job. And they were worried that the tower was going to be overwhelmed. And I just, again, it goes back to what I started to say at the beginning, which is we don't demand enough out of our people sometimes. And I don't mean just the controllers, pilots as well. Let's face it, when you take a check ride, what are you being graded on? You're being graded to a minimum standard. It's not like Brandon's the ace of the class. It doesn't matter. If you met minimum standards, you're certified. Does that mean that you can go jump into a 200-foot overcast day in an airplane you've got 4 hours in, and it needs to be a little more flexible than that, and I think that's system wide. But so again, I wonder what kind of pizza I should order.
As we talked, I realized something. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But more importantly, I'm glad that chat didn't mean what I thought it did. But what do you all think? Do you have a dialogue with your local ATC facility? Do you want to? It'll probably come as no surprise that I think communication is probably the missing link in any relationship, but it doesn't have to be all office space style corporate communication. That doesn't help anybody. No one likes it. Actually, probably makes things worse. But if you're willing to meet person to person and talk about each other's missions, well, it's usually amazing what you can accomplish. Plus, it's a really great networking opportunity too. Anyway, I want to thank Rob for coming on the show and saying his piece about that. I hope you guys didn't mind hearing us talk shop. It was a lot of fun. Before we wrap up, though, iTunes and other podcatchers like Google Play, Stitcher, etc., they all rank podcasts largely based on reviews, and I'd really appreciate it if you'd head over there and leave one. Since you're probably holding your phone right now, it'll only take a second. Plus, it's totally free. And it'll go a long way to help others find the podcast so we can grow the community and promote this great thing we call aviation for everyone. Plus, probably read it on the show, too. And since you've stayed this long, I want to take a quick second to talk to you about becoming a patron of the show. The way it works is if you get value from the show and you want to help support it financially, you can pledge a couple of bucks per episode or per month, or even just as a one-time thing. You'll also get a shout out and a thank you on the show and access to recordings that are a little more candid that didn't make the cut for the public version. And for the higher level pledges, you'll even get a little one-on-one time with me to discuss your aviation experience in just about any context you want. So if that's something you'd like to do, head over to podcastingonaplane.com/support. There's a link right below in the show notes that'll take you there and get you started. Anyway, that's all for now. Thanks again for listening. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day. The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. My comments and those of my guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc. are not part of my official responsibility as a controller or an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on the podcast are mine and those of my guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA.